So at some point, we have friends who continue to be in the church. We're not in the church or not attending anymore. And we can have this elephant in the relationship, unspoken of, or we can talk about it. And I didn't want to have elephants. So we went out to lunch or dinner. We met with several couples separately who were our friends. And I wanted to explain, hey, this is where I am. This is what happened. My intent was not to change their mind. It was just to explain myself briefly. If they want to have a conversation about anything, I welcome it. And then at least they'll understand what's up with Sam now. And we had varying...
What's up with Bishop?
Yeah. Yeah, we had varying responses from people. Some people not interested in hearing anything about it.
Yeah.
Some people very willing to listen and hear. And one thing that I observed in these discussions with friends and just at this point when I'm bringing up issues that I had never learned about, and I recognize that there are members of the church who do learn about these things and they continue to believe and they continue to attend. And I seriously wanted to understand that. I don't understand. How do you look at this issue or that issue? So help me understand that. And so I'd have these conversations with people. And what I learned, at least from some people, there's this level of knowledge where you're ignorant. I was in the relatively ignorant category, and a level of knowledge above which you either leave the church or you become nuanced. And by nuanced, I mean these people would explain to me what doctrine is or what it isn't, and their nuanced view is not what the church teaches. So they stay in the church and they believe the church while simultaneously holding beliefs that contradict the most basic teachings of the church. Right. Like they have some kind of special knowledge that the brethren aren't teaching us, and I don't know. I had already made up my mind that the church was a fraud, but that was just also part of me understanding that not everybody is ignorant of these things. Some people have learned about these things, and they were willing to go places, I guess, logically, mentally, that I just couldn't follow.
Right. Well, and at that point, it seems, I mean, obviously integrated within religious belief is, right, like the desperate desire for stability in your worldview and in your mindset. And that's something we all share, right? No one's really free from that, which is one reason why it's so difficult to break free of the church itself. But I think that part of the issue of people developing nuanced perspectives is, you know, at some point it becomes more, even if it's subconscious, it becomes more about maintaining the worldview than actually specifically the belief in the church, right? Because, yeah, if you have a belief that's contradictory to the church's doctrines, but you say, you know, oh, the men are fallible or whatnot, obviously people have their different reasons for doing these things and believing these things, and I'm not going to like generalize and say that all people have one reason for doing something, but it seems that it's much easier for the sort of animalistic brain to take over and say, we're just defending our territory right now. Like our mindset cannot and must not be changed. That's what's being defended here. And that's why we're going to come up with an explanation no matter the contradiction to the very thing being supposedly defended.
I just really quick, I think my issue with staying in the church with the nuanced view is that people who do this do it for themselves because, like we've already discussed, the church works for some people and it really doesn't work for others. You know, it doesn't work for a lot of LGBTQ youth, for instance. And so, like, it's just a very limited perspective to, like, kind of choose and pick aspects of religion while not really trying to shoot for change within religion because it suits you, you know? Does that make sense?
It's kind of a position of privilege. A lot of the nuanced, liberal, progressive Mormons that stay in, you know, they're probably not super feminist or not super LGBT affirming, or they don't have a close family member whose life might be at stake, or they get money from their relationships in the church or status. And it's like, yeah, well, okay, it's not true, but like, it's good for my business. It's good for clients. I don't want to make my parents sad. It's not killing my kids. It's not killing me.
Yeah.
It's working for me. And so, but at the same time, I'm always torn because like that's most religions, like most normal non-high demand religions, Catholicism. I've got friends here in Salt Lake City who are raised Catholic. They're atheist. Mm-hmm. They practice birth control. Mm-hmm. They believe women should be priests. They hate the pedophilia in the Catholic Church, but they send their kids to Catholic schools because it's a good education, and they sing in the choir because it's good for their brains and it's fun, and they've got a social group, but they think the Pope's full of crap, mm-hmm. and they don't think the Catholic Church is the one true church, and they're atheists, and the priests don't care. And so like I'm split because that's like so many world religions today, and Mormonism is clearly moving in that direction.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a degree to which that's fine. Like just like and when we started off Mormon Stories, we did this thing about stages of faith with James Fowler, which is there's stage 3, orthodox binary worldview, literalistic, James Fowler talks about this. There's that mindset. Then you go through the dark night of the soul, which is stage 4, and then you can reassemble a more literalist, non-literal, metaphorical, symbolic, progressive worldview as a stage 5 religious person. And you can coexist with the stage 3 people, mm-hmm. but you just engage at the church on a bit of a more privileged, higher level where you take the good, leave the bad. You don't take it all seriously. And the scriptures are metaphor and symbolic, and the leaders are just doing the best they can. And in a way, I'm circling back to a question I've already asked you, which is like, I think on some level, there's nothing wrong with that. But then on some level, it's only going to work for some people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to get the sense that you're going to tell me that wasn't an option for you.
Yeah. So like I said, for me, it was all about the truth.
Yeah. The truth mattered.
The truth mattered to me. And when I said nuanced, I didn't really even mean what you described there. I mean like a full-on true believer who has an understanding of doctrine that is not taught. Like, he understands doctrine in a way that allows him to be a full-on believer that nobody else in his ward, it's not just me. It's like, this is not how members of the church interpret what's taught.
It's not Mormonism.
That's not what's taught. Going back to what I was saying before, like, you want to have it both ways. They're just doing their best while simultaneously they say, we always get it right. You always have to obey. But they have this nuanced view as
well. This goes back to Festinger and cognitive dissonance theory. If your beliefs are different, from your behavior, and you've got to figure out a way to square it all, you're going to get religious people that adopt their theology so that they can stay active in the church, right. So they don't have to live with the cognitive dissonance. Right. And the truth is, the church, I think, doesn't care. As long as you're paying your tithing, attending, serving, they don't care what's going on between your ears, as long as you're not disturbing people, spreading the virus. And this is probably, I'd say, a third of active Mormons don't believe in Doctrine and Covenants 132, don't believe in polygamy, don't care about the afterlife. And my mom's this way. She's just like, you're going to be at the afterlife. I'm like, I'm excommunicated. She's like, right. What do they know? But she goes to church and she's active, and it's totally fine. But and I'm like, well, like, is the Book of Mormon literal? She's like, I don't care. I'm like, what do you mean you don't care? She's like, I don't care. Yeah. Like, Book of Mormon, it's just scripture, and and she's got her own theology. She sees the scriptures, but she's still a believer. She still believes in God. She still believes in Jesus. Thinks we'll all be together in the afterlife. And I guess on some level, I think that's like actually normal. That's like what Presbyterians and Methodists and Lutherans, that's what they do. Yeah. And we're
Right.
it's only because we were primed with a religious theology and doctrine of saying we are the one true church, we're God's mouthpieces, and we had the binary literalistic
Yes.
worldview. That's where for us it all comes crashing down. And some would say that's good. Secularism's best. Like, get out of this thing that isn't true because truth matters. And LGBT people are killing themselves and women are suppressing their voice. So religion bad, get out. But then there's a lot of other people that are like, no, don't throw the baby out the bathwater. Everything's imperfect. Systems will all fail you. It's a good community. It's a good moral structure. It's a good way to raise the kids. Truth, schmooth.
Yeah,
Goodness there. And I don't think there's a right answer, honestly,
Yeah, and so
for everyone.
Right.
And obviously, religious belief in particular, and even just a question of the utility and adoption of religious belief, totally personal, right? I agree with you when I think it would be incredibly arrogant for someone, especially like me, to just say, "Here's the answer, guys. Live like this." What I will say is there's a question of like how individuals choose to act within religions, and then there's religious institutions, right? Because the Catholic Church wasn't always, oh yeah, you're an atheist, you're literally an atheist, like, cool, whatever, we don't care.
They kill you.
Yeah, you're dead, or you're tortured, or you're burned, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, I think, as you mentioned, not only will we are seeing the Mormon Church having being beaten down, being forced to submit to the social influences around it. So yeah, in terms of individuals, sure, it's all, I can have my opinion, you can have yours, and that's where a debate exists. In terms of institutions, I don't think there's any good coming, like there's nothing virtuous about a Catholic Church which is accepting of, frankly, anything, but particularly atheists or apostates, when yesterday's Catholic Church was the Inquisition, was you die if you're an atheist, was we have no tolerance while we're strong and we're actually in control.
And like 6 or 8% of the priests systematically abusing children.
Right, of course.
And just reassigning priests, and all over the world, like the amount of pain and suffering of how many children were sexually abused.
Oh, yeah.
That was all with the money and the power of the church. And so that, I think there is a real institutional issue. And then in our case, all the LGBT youth suicides, all the marriages that were split up, because fortunately for you guys, you were on the similar pages.
Right.
For so many others, it's like, I'm leaving you and I'm taking the kids, family destroyed. There's suicides, there's depression, there's anxiety, there's broken families. There's all the women whose potential didn't live up to their potential because they bought into the don't worry about an education, don't worry about a career, just get married and have kids. A lot of kids, collateral damage as they're living with these broken families. Like, there's a serious moral, ethical problem with religions that use their power and money to teach something that isn't true, and that are willing to accept and perpetuate the carnage, the human carnage that happens.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For propping up beliefs that aren't true.
Yeah.
Right. I was just going to mention maybe it's just overkill adding to the list of Catholic institutional atrocities, but the Pope saying essentially, like while the AIDS epidemic was sweeping across Africa, AIDS is bad, but condoms are worse. Like, this is our standard. This is God's standard for what you should be doing, right? Like, yeah, it's the
in the name of God.
Right, exactly. And it is the inclusion of God that makes that a problem. If a man, like if a scientist, right, said, okay, AIDS are bad, but condoms, like you're either going to an afterlife of pain and torture, or it's just going to kill you somehow. Now, like, we would actually accept that as man-made and analyze it as such, right? But when God's involved, you better back off and listen up.
It's undue influence.
Right, exactly.
When you start invoking God and speaking for God, then you're wielding undue influence on people, such that when the carnage happens, you kind of are accountable for the carnage. You don't just get off scot-free like, you do good. No, you're exerting undue influence to harm a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. When I met with the stake president to ask to be released, he... What does he want, right? He wants me to be able to resolve my concerns and continue to be part of the church. So he's, so we'll take that burden off of you. We can release you. And of course, we would like you to still keep coming to church, keep attending, and you can just attend. You don't have to have any responsibility. But I think I knew the lay of the land at that point. I knew what was up. But even if I had been unsure at that point, there's no room in the church for somebody who would be asking the questions that I was asking. Those questions have to be kept in the dark. Those questions are only supposed to be asked behind closed doors with one or two people, the stake president, the bishop, and that, I think, is additional evidence of the fact that it's all false, that it's all a fraud. The truth can withstand scrutiny.
Right.
And the ironic thing is that there are statements like that from presidents of the church. It's just when the rubber hits the road, they didn't actually mean it.
Right, exactly. It's you pay homage, or however you pronounce that. you like bow down to the image of truth, but whether it's behind closed doors or out in the open, you don't really care about it at all. That is the pattern of not only the church, but across many religions, backpedaling and disavowals and outright lies. Yeah.
And coming back to what you were saying, John, about there not being one right way for someone to be in or out of the church. Festinger's cognitive dissonance can go the other way too, where you leave the church, like you believe in the church and that it's true, but you don't live according to its values, and that causes that. I wouldn't recommend that for someone either, right? So I'm not saying that the path I've taken is the path, but in order to live according to my values and what I believe, that's what I needed to do to be mentally well and to have happiness and good health. So I think that's, and kind of like what we were talking about with those spiritual conversions to a religion, people have this experience that leads them to something that maybe they need at that time. And when you don't need the church anymore, you're able to have another spiritual experience or uplifting experience that leads you to what you now need. And I guess that's how I view it, is that and this sounds presumptuous, but I've outgrown the church. I no longer need it like I did. And I did like it for a long time, but I don't now. So
Richard Dawkins, just an interesting note. I think it is Richard Dawkins. Some secularist, atheist author relatively recently published a book called Outgrowing Religion or Outgrowing God.
Yeah.
And of course, Orthodox Mormons are going to say that's the height of arrogance and pride.
Right.
You don't need you study and you learn, and the learned are prideful, and
Right.
and you've become prideful, and now you're better than the church, and you don't need it, and that's
I know it sounds that way, but I don't mean it that way.
yeah.
It's just,
And that's all part of the information control and the mind control. Is
Yeah.
learning is good as long as you hearken unto the counsels of God, as revealed by me, the president of the church.
yeah, and it's servitude, right? It's when I would read the Sermon on the Mount and start memorizing it in your footsteps, actually, and be like, the meek shall inherit the earth. Heck yeah, I'll take that. The meek are going to inherit the earth. Well, what is that teaching? Be meek,
Be submissive,
right?
Be submissive.
You are supposed to be sheep. You're supposed to be led by this figure, right? And all these things seem so benign. It seems obvious that they're benign and benevolent when you're involved and when you're invested in them. And then once you take a step back and look at that, you see, this, even if God actually created this thing, it's a really effective way to control human beings. It doesn't even matter if you believe that it's true or not. It's just good at controlling people, and that's dangerous.
So your stake president had
Well, I was just saying there's no room. He wanted me to attend without serving in a calling, and
stay quiet.
yeah, and that, what's the point? I wouldn't be able to ask, hey, do you guys know about this? They don't actually want people to know about all this stuff in the gospel topic essays. If they did, they would teach it every Sunday.
Yeah. They don't want members to read the gospel topics essays.
That's my firm belief. So we were meeting with friends. I was I didn't believe.
How did
Like
friends receive you talking to them about your non-belief?
So there was a variety of responses. Some said, let's not talk about that. And some said, or some were willing to entertain discussion. I think motivated out of like the love and the personal relationship that we have, but also the church love and duty. Like, you're a suffering, lost, deceived soul right now, and if I can help you resolve these concerns, then I want to do that. And so I'll listen and I'll discuss. So there was mixed responses from the people that we know.
Yeah, and I don't fault anyone for, some of them were hurtful, but I don't fault anyone because I remember what it was like to be there and to feel that extreme discomfort, and so I don't fault anyone, but yeah, we got a mix of.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I'll say, when I was reading the comments of that individual on Facebook where he mentioned the CS letter and he was mentioning things criticizing the church, I can't remember. I may have blocked him. Like that was the kind of response that was welling up inside of me as a believer, is I want to shut this out of my life.
Yeah.
And so we had met with some friends, and I tried to bring these things up with my family. Well, I did bring them up with my family. So the reveal, the coming out to my family was that the 4th of July-ish?
Yeah, I think so.
Last summer, been about a year now, we went down to Utah to visit family, and nobody knew. I hadn't given any kind of inkling to anybody that this is where I was, and I struck up the conversation, and I did not like the response. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but and like Sara just said, I can't fault them because I've treated other people that way my entire life.
Right.
But, well, not entirely. So one of the responses was essentially like, how is it that you're just finding out about these things? We've known these things all along. So I felt like there was some gaslighting. Like, what church did I go to? What church did I grow up in? Apparently, I wasn't paying attention all this time. There was that, and I think not a desire to listen and understand, but rather to fix me. So I tried, and at least my family understood where I stood, and we went back home, and I tried a couple of more times on a Slack conversation that the family has to bring these things up, and I was not welcome in doing that.
Your family talks through Slack?
Yeah.
That's pretty techie.
Yeah, we have a chat.
You're a techie family.
Yeah. And so I didn't have anybody to talk to anymore. And so a little bit after that point, I decided, I guess I felt I really need to explore this and talk to people about this. And so I started posting on Facebook questions, quotes, things that I didn't know that I feel like were withheld from me. And apparently everybody else knew about them. The kind of feeling that I get from people that I bring it up to. And so if that's the case, it shouldn't be a problem for me to post these things on Facebook. And so that reached a larger audience, and it reached friends and acquaintances from decades past, right, reaching far into the past. And there were a variety of responses, mostly ardent defense of the church, an unwillingness to acknowledge any validity in my concerns. Like, even if you still want to believe, is what I'm even saying true? Like, and so that was frustrating and disappointing. That activity is what led to the notice for the membership council with the charge of apostasy.
That started last year.
My activity, it
Your
would have
Facebook.
been, I think it was
just
like
January.
Yeah, of this year.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so just the last several months.
So what I heard you say is that you tried to, you're like, you love your family. Family's everything in Mormonism. Religion's everything, to us. And so, you've figured things out with your wife, maybe, or you're starting to, and your kids. You're kind of all getting the same page. But you've got your parents, you've got your siblings, you've got aunts and uncles, and all this extended family. You would think that because family is the most important thing, you could just go to all of them and have heart-to-hearts and really support each other and love each other. But then you find out that either people don't want to talk about it, or they gaslight you, or they cut you out of their lives in many instances. And so you just feel like, who do I talk to? And you don't know how to make sense of the world. And it's so confusing. This all happened to me while I was at Microsoft. And so, you're like, you turn to social media. It's just like, well, am I crazy? Like, am I broken? Am I bad? Are there others? Like, is there anybody? If my family either doesn't want to talk about it or they'll gaslight me and kind of deny it, I want to know outside my family that I'm not crazy,
Right.
that maybe there's others. I want to have people to talk to. And you're starting to lose your community and friends. And so
Right.
you want to, they say a lone monkey is a dead monkey. So you want to find community and friends.
Okay.
And so it's just so very natural to go to social media to want to just put the stuff out there and see what you find.
Yes.
But that's where the church is drawing the line these days, saying, and I hate to say it, but the BITE model, which is Stephen Hassan's sort of acronym for how unhealthy organizations exert undue control. They control your behavior, they control information, they control your thoughts, and they manipulate you through emotion. And you know that you're in an unhealthy organization, or as some people want to call it, a cult, if the organization does everything they can to control your behavior, to limit the information others receive, and by limiting the information, control the thoughts people have. And so thus the church has drawn the line, and they don't care so much what you think or feel anymore. They don't even care if you don't believe anymore. They're like, stay in, have
Right.
callings. Like, certainly we don't want a bishop to lose his, to like be perceived as having lost their faith. So stay in, have a temple recommend.
Right.
I don't care.
Right.
You can be an atheist and we'll give you a temple recommend as long as
yeah.
you're quiet.
That
Why
is-
are you laughing about that?
Well, so I didn't go in with it to renew my recommend or something, but weren't you at some nuanced place?
That's some new
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I just
When the stake president said he'd give me
Yeah.
a temple recommend.
I'm just laughing or nodding vigorously that yes, that is the case. As I always interpreted the temple questions, like this was a filtering, screening process that you had to meet this bar of behavior and faith
It's a yes or no.
to qualify to enter the sacred house of the Lord. And the reality is please take one, have one.
Because they don't want the former bishop and the former bishop's wife without temple recommends, right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest question for me was another change that they made, was a question about, do you disagree? It's like, why can't we, or do you agree?
Affiliate.
Yeah, agree, but agree was one of the words before they changed it. And I was like, why can't we disagree and still be together in the church? Like, why do I have to agree? That seemed really controlling to me. And the stake president was like, we'll still give you a recommend. Like, if you can't answer those questions, and I don't want to quote him because I don't remember everything we talked about, but the gist was that, yeah, I would still be able to get a recommend if I wanted it.
And at this point, you weren't believing the church was true.
That was, I just disagreed with a lot. And he was saying that was okay.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, some would say that's good. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
he's progressive.
no,
He's
and-
allowing diversity of thought.
and I did
and-
really appreciate it in the moment. Yeah.
Well, but and that's the thing. I think that the increased tolerance of religious institutions from the Catholic Church to Mormonism is perceived and called, maybe even channeled through love, right? It's like we now, like you can get a temple recommend even if you disagree with the church, which is true now, and it wasn't true yesterday, but you can do that now because it's all about you. It's all about love. God loves you. We love you. It's all like, it's got to be this lovey-dovey, like cushy sort of situation, when a more cynical and, in my view, realistic perspective is, again, when religious institutions get beaten to death with a club, they
The Truth Club.
The Truth Club. They capitulate and they say, well, now we're just the kindest people you ever met. And I don't want to keep pulling in external sources or anything, but Christopher Hitchens, you've probably heard of him. He makes this amazing point in a lot of his discussions where he says, in modern times, religion crawls to us on its hands and knees with this ingratiating smile and offers itself as this, an entity of love and tolerance and forgiving. But to accept it as what it portrays itself to be today is to willfully ignore what it was like when it was strong, when it had influence, when it did get to decide who died and when and why. That is what defines an institution and an ideology, in my opinion.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that the church is all about love now, but they also have $200 billion in assets.
Yeah.
They we had the Republican nominee for president of the United States came out of our religious tradition. The Senate minority or majority leader, Harry Reid, the Mormon church is super powerful now. Mm-hmm. And even so, they were beaten into submission with the truth hammer, which is Google and the internet and podcasts and Jeremy Runnels. They were beaten into this position, and you make a really good point that they didn't do it out of altruism or love. Yeah. They did it because they had no choice. Yeah.
Exactly.
They were forced,
of course,
to change.
Yeah.
And I think there's no going back. The narrative that I was given was, we've got the truth, black and white, and now they're trying to shift it to something else. Some of the time we get it wrong, and though they can't be both. Pick one, but once you've picked one, how do you explain the other one? And if you pick, sometimes we get it wrong, then
why do you need them?
Why do you think that you're any different than any other church that you point out and say there's good in them, but they get it wrong?
And then they'll say, well, we have the authority, we have the ordinances.
Exactly.
What they're retreating to now is our special place in the world is that we have the keys.
Yeah.
Right.
Which comes down to authority. So our ordinances, baptism, endowment, temple marriage, Mormonism's put on the earth to have the keys to the ordinances you need to get back to heaven. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, totally. And it's an ironic reality that the ways in which religions differentiate themselves from others tend to be the same, right? We're different because we actually do have the authority of God. Everyone else is saying the same thing, so I don't know how much credibility that grants that claim.
So, the Race and the Priesthood essay, shaking my confidence in Revelation. Revelation was supposed to be this absolutely sure path to knowledge. You can know the truth. Revelation will allow you to know things that you cannot know in any other way, and it's more reliable than your senses. It's more reliable than anything science can bring forth. And so when I started revisiting that idea and thinking about that, I had spent 40 years in the model of the church is true, and I prayed and I got revelation that that was the case, meaning I felt peace. I had warm, fuzzy feelings about it, and I hear about many people who, in that, when they find troubling things, they get on their knees seeking for some resolution or clarification that will make it all go away. And oftentimes it's, don't worry about it. You don't know everything, but you know enough. And what I did was pray to know if the Book of Mormon is not true, and is the church complete rubbish. And I had the same powerful spiritual feelings that I ever had about anything positive about the church. And then I prayed to know that the moon is made of Swiss cheese. And I had a powerful spiritual experience that the moon is made of Swiss cheese. That settled that question. I believe that people get spiritual confirmations of whatever they want to believe. And that's consistent with what we see in the LDS Church. The past presidents of the church, did they feel the Spirit as they formulated their sermons that they delivered in General Conference and published in the official publications of the church? And did the members of the church feel the Spirit as they received those teachings that are now disavowed? Yes, they did, right? Those teachings weren't delivered and received devoid of the same spiritual revelatory process that is relied on to justify everything else that people know to be true.
Yeah, well, and I had a great conversation with some people involved in debate again, who are stalwart, like lifelong members of the church. And the person, I won't like say who it was specifically, but the person who I had an hour-long conversation about the church and personal revelation specifically was like a figure of authority in the spheres of like public school debate in high school, right? So, and I was talking to this person who was a Mormon, and we were having this conversation. It got to personal revelation, and I said, okay, so we have to understand, and I hope we agree, that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't have a monopoly on personal revelation, right? And that's something that this usually reasonable person, I assumed, would have agreed to, like it was not even a point of contention. Instead, it took 45 minutes of circular reasoning, irrationalities, logical fallacies, and total nonsense for us to arrive at that conclusion that, yeah, it just doesn't. Like a Catholic can feel just as strongly as a Muslim can feel just as strongly as a Mormon can feel that their church is the one true church, right? Like definitionally contradictory claims. And it's that kind of like the difficulty that it can take for an entrenched mindset to just move from, okay, my religion doesn't have a monopoly among the species, right? It doesn't have a monopoly on personal revelation. The fact that it can take an hour for that simple point to be reached, I think is just one example of how it's so difficult to make just one point. Imagine, or we've experienced, like it's obvious how difficult it is to make entrenched religious mindsets move in any productive manner, right? Because if that's so difficult, how are you going to prove that the Book of Mormon isn't true, right?
So basically, Revelation was broken for me, and like the path to knowledge outlined in Alma 32 is now I see confirmation bias galore. Like, why do you start with a desire to believe the thing that you want to know? Everything that I know now is true, whether I want it to be true or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So you start sharing your stuff on Facebook. What types of posts do you start sharing?
Oh, I've shared several quotes of presidents of the church that missedinsunday.com makes into a nice little shareable meme. Some of the early...
So you're just quoting the brethren?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, how is that apostasy?
This is a good question.
So the types of quotes talking about what?
Yeah, so some of the first ones that I remember posting include Elder Oaks, President Oaks, saying, so if I remember it correctly, he was responding to a question in a fireside from somebody whose spouse or family member was inactive, and this individual wanted to know, what's the best way for me to approach research in order to respond to the doubts of my loved one, my spouse? And Elder Oaks's response was, let me suggest that research is not the answer. And so I had previously had a conversation with a member of the church suggesting that, wherein I contended that the church has a history of anti-intellectualism, that it actually does oppose certain kinds of research and certain lines of inquiry. And so that was kind of, I think that was the inspiration for that post. Like, my family members telling me that no way, the church teaches us to embrace education. You know that, Sam. Of course we love knowledge. You can't be saved in ignorance. The glory of God is intelligence. And yet we have this question with that answer. And So I wanted to put it out there and say, like, how do you guys explain this? I got accused of taking his words out of context, even though missedonsunday.com includes all the references and links, everything.
I think because it came from Missed in Sunday School, people saw it as having an agenda. And so even though it was the verbatim quote, yeah, there was a lot of, what's your intent in posting this? You shouldn't be posting this stuff. Nothing really addressing the question or the quote. A lot of ad hominem attacks, or a lot of just, you're taking this out of context. And yeah.
Okay.
It's just frustrating.
Yeah. So at the beginning, a lot of it was nothing super, I didn't feel like anything super provocative, just statements about kind of where I was with learning things that nobody had ever told me. And I also would share posts and ask questions. I had read Fair Mormon explanations for troubling facts and concepts as I began this process, and I didn't find them helpful at all. In fact, Fair Mormon helped me complete my apostasy. And so I had a post where I asked people what they thought about Fair Mormon. Does it do more harm than good? Is it...
have you found it helpful?
Yeah, were you aware of it? Have you read anything? And recently I shared several about sexism in the church.
Another one you posted was, things have been taught in general conference in the past that were wrong. If that happens now, will you know, and how will you know?
Yeah, right
like
before conference I shared
hoping
that.
to get people to think about, so we know the prophets have disavowed what's in the past. So if that were to happen today, how could you know?
Yeah.
And yeah.
I was critical of the church's actions with respect to COVID and passing the sacrament. I've been... What else? Sex.
Yeah. Go ahead. Keep going.
I'm just remembering I did several kind of in rapid succession related to sexism, including one where, I'm forgetting who it was now, shared that his wife had borne him 14 children, and to have done anything less would have been less than her duty and privilege. Yeah. And I asked, hey, like, do all of you out there, do you agree? Would that have been less than her duty and privilege? And so stuff like that, just things that I feel like illustrate serious problems in what the church is claiming today. It's claimed to have these eternal principles that are changing all the time. Why aren't we telling women today they need to have 14 children, or grievous sin? That's what birth control used to be. And now the timing and number of children you have, that's a personal matter. It's not the church's business. So these...
Just pointing out inconsistencies and just asking questions. A lot of, and some criticism of... But always with a question, like, what do you think? Like, and his posts would get like, and sometimes mine as well would get like 100 comments, 200 comments. Like, they got some traction.
Yeah, so I'm looking at your Facebook wall right now. And by the way, the excommunication eventually is for apostasy, pretty much for Facebook posts. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, so like as I review your Facebook wall, you've already mentioned a lot of the quotes, but you're quoting Hugh B. Brown and the statements he makes about like it's important to have thoughts and to be a thinker. You're quoting You're talking about the church's response to COVID-19. You're talking about apologetics, polygamy. But everything you're saying is like quoting the church, quoting church leaders, quoting past authoritative statements. To some extent, you're encouraging free thoughts or the ability to question. But you're not like outright saying the church is a fraud. You're not saying the Book of Mormon is a fraud, or are you?
Well, that did come.
Okay.
Yeah. So initially, I didn't. Initially, I focused on asking questions and sharing information, and that didn't sit well with a lot of people who commented on my posts. They wanted me to share. Well, what do you think? What do you think? And initially, I wasn't interested in talking about my beliefs. I wanted to talk about these quotes and these facts, and so I resisted making it about me.
Yeah.
This is not a Sam problem. These facts, these teachings, this history, this is the problem that I want to talk about. But eventually, I did start sharing my feelings, and I did make statements that are critical of the church, and I did say things like Joseph Smith is a fraud, the church is a fraud, Russell M. Nelson is a liar.
That's strong language.
And the God of Mormonism is a racist. So I did make some strong statements that do reflect how I feel, and those last three statements are three things that were specifically brought up during the membership council. They were brought up in a text message that the stake president sent to me before the membership council.
But before that, I think the bishop had asked you to stop posting.
So let's talk about that. So you're making all these posts. When did the church start getting involved?
I don't have the exact timing
details.
of it So here's an interesting thing. The day I did my first post on Facebook that was critical of the church.
Was that January of this year?
I believe that it was January of this year. I got a text message from the stake president. He hadn't contacted me, I think, for nearly a year, personally. It had been a long time since the last personal contact from the stake president. And coincidence? Maybe. I don't think it was. I think that I was reported, and that's why he reached out. So that marked a beginning of scrutiny and awareness, I think, of what I was doing.
Is that eerie a little bit?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why?
That's what the Gestapo did. It's odd. I can believe whatever I want, and it's a free country. I can share information. It seems weird and unhealthy to try to restrict information, quotes from the leaders of the LDS Church, right? This is your church. These are your leaders. And you want to pretend that was the problem, right? I was sharing quotes from leaders. And that contact was when I shared some direct quote that was about research not being the answer or something like that. I had not revealed my own personal feelings about the church. I hadn't said personally anything critical about the church.
And Oaks did say that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And we know that people were reporting Sam because the leaders would tell us that I've been sent information. I've been sent thousands of pages of
He said, I've got 100 pages of your Facebook posts here.
So we knew someone was.
Who was that? Do you think it's board members?
I don't
have
know.
suspicions, but no, we don't know.
But that's deeply troubling to me. When I was in the church, I didn't do anything like that. I don't understand wanting to take the time to rat someone out.
To monitor someone, to collect what they're writing.
To send it to the leader in the hopes of what? It bothers me a lot.
Yeah.
And then not knowing who it is, too, is hard to trust, I guess.
So a little bit of the strengthening the members committee happening at the local level. So what are we talking about?
You didn't want to meet with him.
So he reaches out.
So he reached out then, and I said, hey, I'm curious why the sudden interest in me. It's been a while since we talked. Did I do something wrong? And he didn't say anything about Facebook. So there was no acknowledgement of that was a problem, or that's why he contacted me. But I didn't stop posting. And
well, you told him you weren't interested in meeting.
Oh yeah, he wanted to meet with me.
As stake president
True.
and constituent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that happened then, but he wanted to see how I was doing with my journey and my research, and I think he may have asked to meet then. I declined. Nothing had changed in my feeling. And then at some point, the bishop contacted me. Oh, yeah, so I'm really good friends with the bishop. Considered him probably to be my best friend.
Was he a counselor for you when you were a bishop?
No, he was on the High Council.
Okay.
Yeah, so we among many things, we bonded in our love for the church and our service. And so he's a busy guy as bishop now of the ward.
And you're close friends.
And we're close friends. We had talked many times about getting together for lunch and just to catch up on how each other is doing. And
But had he ever tried to save your testimony or rescue you, or?
Yeah,
Did
so
we already talk about that?
I didn't mention that earlier.
Okay.
No, so I met with the stake president and I asked to be released, and I told him how I felt. I think it was within 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. I was actually a little bit sick, and he called because the stake president had communicated to him what was going on with me.
Your bishop.
Yeah, so my bishop called and wanted to talk, and this was 9:30 or 10:30 at 10 at night or something like that. I wanted to go to sleep, but I totally understand. Hearing that news for him must have been very shocking, and that he wanted to reach out as my friend and as the bishop. So we actually stayed talking in his car in the church parking lot until I think 2:30 in the morning, exploring it all. And he tried to understand and resolve my concerns and shared his testimony with me.
This is in 2019, like way back, right?
Yeah, that would have been like May.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was, I asked to be released. I hadn't been released yet.
Yeah.
Nobody knew except the stake president and the bishop. So at that point, he did reach out as my friend and as bishop and tried to save me.
Yeah.
Then fast forwarding.
Then you went inactive and okay.
Yeah.
Fast forward
back to after this interaction with the stake president, and I'm posting more. We're talking about, the bishop and I are talking about getting together for lunch, and I told him, I'm not going to stop posting, and I don't want to have a conversation that's stake president. Like, he asked me if I would meet with the stake president, I think, and I said, no, I don't want to meet stake president congregant. No interest in that. And I don't want to meet bishop congregant either. So we are able to arrange a lunch date. We get together
as friends.
Right, that was my understanding. And we are, of course, talking about my concerns. I talk about my concerns with my friends, so that was fine. But then at the end of the meeting, he put on his bishop hat and said, I've got to ask you to stop posting. You're deliberately weakening the faith of members. And I felt like I was sharing the truth. And this may sound like a little legalistic semantic issue maybe, but in Alma 32:21, faith is hope in something that is true. You cannot have faith in something that's not true. And so my opinion is that truth cannot harm faith. If faith is ever at odds with the truth, the faith is what needs to change. The faith either needs to be abandoned or it needs to be adapted. And therefore, I'm not weakening faith by sharing true statements. And in fact, I can't. It's impossible for me to do that. In that conversation, he disagreed and acknowledged that there are some truths that do weaken faith, which that's problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I actually feel like, I'm not sure if he was like thinking through this process or even aware of this idea, but I think if you're going to be a true and like faithful, member of that ideology and religion, and if you believe that verse in Alma is true, as you obviously should, then you kind of have to say that some truths like can challenge faith, because if you accept that faith cannot, according to that scripture, be challenged by truth, then I think that you've actually undermined the whole idea of faith in the first place, right? The whole, or at least how it's used in modern times, really. We have faith because whether it's evolution or whether it's the age of the earth or the universe or anything else that contradicts our beliefs, we exercise faith, religiously speaking, to ignore that stuff, to say, okay, but my God's going to figure it out, or in the afterlife it'll be okay. So
I believe in that in spite of what the evidence is.
Right.
But anyway, so the groundwork was being laid for excommunication. That the language used referenced the definition of apostasy in the handbook, and I was put on notice, stop your activity on Facebook. I said, I love the truth too much. I won't. You do what you need to do. So that was the end of that conversation. And then...
And just, that Boyd K. Packer said this in the early 80s, not all things that are true are useful.
Yeah.
And so the church realized long ago that the truth isn't always
right.
Healthy for faith.
Yeah.
And if you have to choose between faith and the truth, you go with faith
Yeah.
over truth.
Yeah. I think that may have been one of my posts as well, that quote, and people telling me I was interpreting it all wrong, took it out of context. And then sometime later, I think my next contact may have been from the stake president through a text message reiterating we've been really patient with you. We've tried really hard. You need to stop posting. And then there may have been yet another message from the bishop. I think he asked me, hey, have you changed your mind about Facebook or your posting? And every time I answered consistently, nope, I haven't changed my mind. I'm not going to stop posting. And then I think that those communications spread out from the initial contact to, I don't know, about last week that was them warning me and laying the foundation for excommunication. And then I got a message from the stake president that said, we've been patient with you. You haven't stopped. So I really feel like we need to move forward with this. And I may not be quoting him exactly, but that was the sentiment. And so...
Let me just say that, just ask you here. So I'm kind of two minds about this, having been through all this and having talked to many, many people who've been through it. On the one hand, this is very cult-like behavior. We talked about the bite model, controlling your behavior, stop talking, be silent. Controlling the information, telling you stop spreading the information, even though everything you were sharing was literally quotes from general authorities, authoritative sources, things taught as doctrine, things from scripture, things from the Journal of Discourses. Everything you're teaching is actually true and factual, but it's not useful. It's not helpful to faith. So they're controlling the information, even though it's not anti-Mormon information. It's very Mormon information. They're still wanting to control that because they want to control thoughts of the members, shield them from the truth so they can't have thoughts that would lead them out of the church. And then they're using fear and intimidation to try and silence you. And so all of that's classic bite kind of cult disturbing, monitoring you, collecting, having people tell on you, like all that's super disturbing, and it's super culty, and it's Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's Scientologists, and it's just all the bad things, right? On the other hand, I and when I'm trying to be compassionate and remembering my former self, it all makes sense. Like, they hold these truths to be sacred. They think that the stakes are eternal life or eternal damnation. The church brings so much joy and happiness and meaning to so many people. And I'm sure in their minds, they're like, look, Sam, like, okay, you don't believe anymore. We get it. Yeah. Like, go live your happy, healthy life. Go take your family wherever you take them. Do cool things. Save the world, whatever you want to do. Just leave our church alone. Let us believe in peace. Don't try and change our beliefs. Don't try and like tear down the church. Can't you just like leave the raft for others and go live a happy, healthy life, but not try and tear it all down? And if you're going, we'll give you lots of warnings, several warnings over multiple months. And if you're going to insist on trying to tear down people's faith, tear people out of the church, even if it's with the truth, then yeah, especially because you're in a position of power and influence. Everyone looked up to you. We gave you that power and influence. Yeah, we've got to take you out because otherwise this virus, forgive the pun, in the COVID, pandemic, kind of in a coronavirus world, you're gonna spread the virus, and other people are gonna get sick and spiritually die. So we've got to quarantine you, or you're gonna spiritually kill lots of people and lots of families. Like I kind of get it, right? Do you kind of get it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the way that they look at it. So I can appreciate that perspective, and the former self would have voiced exactly those feelings. The current self sees the harm that the church causes. So while there may be some good that comes, that people receive, the hope that they have in an eternal family, I cannot ignore the harm that I know is caused by the church. And so the effect of me sharing the truth and damaging somebody's faith, if that's what happens when they're exposed to these things, I am not responsible for, nor can I control how it affects them. But in my value system, the truth is most important. And that's why I end up sharing rather than withholding. That's why I come down on the side of sharing.
Yeah, that's something that I was troubled by, was that someone was reporting him, and that there was this feeling that if people's faith is being harmed, I need to do something about it. I don't know, it's hard, because I know when you're in the church, the leaders are responsible for the flock's spirituality, right? So they do feel that. But to have people say, he's weakening my faith, and then feel like they need to go like take care of it like a parent to a child, or it was just an interesting dynamic. And I don't know, I just felt like, don't you have like better things to do? Like, go minister, go love. Like, that's what the church was about when I was in it. I never spent my time doing these things, so I have a hard time understanding that desire to ferret him out, pin him down, and cut him loose. Just, yeah, I don't.
Yeah, well, and sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. That isn't going to go away. But something Dad has mentioned is that, perceived threat is a pretty powerful motivator to silencing and censoring, right? And I think that is kind of the thing. You can go and minister, and you can go and like love, and you can use love as your motivator and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if you really understand what's being said, and you do have the closed mind system that is so common in religious individuals and institutions, then yeah, I mean, that is a threat, right? It doesn't even have to be a bad thing. When closed minds are under attack, that generally is an invitation to be open-minded, right? But when you're in that mindset, it's absolutely perceived as a threat. So
I understand.
We can sympathize with that, but at the end of the day, I think there's pretty powerful psychological reasons to, and obviously you're the expert on that, to want to shut that down.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, one more question I have, just because this is the common sort of Richard Bushman, Terrell and Fiona Gibbons, Carl Youngblood kind of response, which is just, and I love Carl and all those people, I respect them, but there is a postmodern move that many progressive, liberal, nuanced Mormons make. This will bring out the philosophy response, but it's sort of like, what is truth? What is translation? What do we know for sure? Like, all organizations are flawed. All leaders are imperfect. Atheists abuse kids and lie. So do churches, but there's imperfect people and organizations everywhere. So yes, truth, but what is truth? And there's so much good the church does, all the humanitarian stuff, giving families meaning and purpose, like giving people community, identity, morality, resolutions about the afterlife. Like, okay, if you want to sort of take this billy club of truth and clobber the church and all its members over the head with it, you can. But there are other values too, like community and values and joy and clean living. And like, chill out, dude. Like, the church does so much good. There's imperfection everywhere. The United States is imperfect. It's done genocide. It's done wars. Like, everything's problematic. What is truth? Like, just let people have what's meaningful to them. You go find meaning and joy, but don't let community and meaning and purpose and all the good of Mormonism, service, don't let all that be thrown away by one value of truth. Right? Wow. Like, there's that argument of just like, take a deeper, wiser view, which is, this means a lot to a lot of people. What is truth anyway? So just let it go and go live your happy, healthy life, and let those who still value it. I mean, yeah, if the LGBT people need to leave, let them leave. If people decide it's not true, if women want to go, let them go do that. Like, yeah, freedom, but don't like actively be trying to take people out of the church or to take the church down.
Well, yeah, people think that, they respond that way. So therefore what? So I'm supposed to go away quietly. The church taught me to value truth and to proclaim it from the rooftops and to sacrifice everything to share the truth. And I was that person. I was that missionary. I dedicated everything to the church. And now that I find out it's a fraud, that I don't believe it anymore, suddenly my approach to truth is supposed to change. Like, my personality didn't change with what I learned. I would also add that if all the people who have recognized the truth leave quietly, what is going to happen to the church? Or injustice is going to be corrected? Is the harm going to stop? And by the time a marginalized or a harmed person figures it out and has the courage to leave, and leaving is not easy. It's not as simple as getting up and walking out of a room. It's extremely difficult. So that's really, it's not a well thought out or an understanding consideration of all of the factors involved. I don't think that going away quietly serves the church. If everybody did that and the church received no outside pressure, what would the church look like today? It'd be more like the KKK than a Christian church.
So you're saying it's not just a position of values, like the church and its members benefit from dissidents and critics calling out the problems.
Absolutely.
And I totally agree. I think if you look at just the past 10, 15 years, there is no single period of time in the history of Mormonism, I believe, where the church, I mean, yes, polygamy was a big change. That took 50 years. Mm-hmm. Yes, blacks in the priesthood was a big change. That took 100 years. But like never in a 10-year period, I think, have we seen so much rapid change as we have in the past 10, 15 years. And that's freaking truth. And the internet and Google and podcasts and CES Letter and dissidents and critics and Kate Kelly and me and Jeremy Runnels and Rock Waterman and all the people, Sam Young and Bill Reel and all the people that have made real sacrifices speaking the truth. That's made Mormonism better for Mormons. It's made the church a healthier organization. It's made it healthier. I think everybody wins. And I want to make sure, Olivia, were you going to say something? I don't. You did grab the mic for a second, and so let's do Olivia then Sam Jr.
Well,
if that's all right.
I was just gonna. You kind of stole the words out of my mouth. I
want to hear it from you.
Okay. Well, I'll paraphrase then, but I mean, just in response to like that whole what is truth? I mean, it's just beneficial for people. Like I mean, like you were saying, you can't just leave. Like it is very much a cult, and it's not a culture. I think a lot of people try to excuse maybe the way that the church lags behind society's progress with like, oh, it's just a culture. You can leave if you want, and you know, like if you're LGBTQ and you need to leave, like leave. Like, but it doesn't work like that. And also, it's not a culture. Like its entire foundation is truth. I mean, ever since you're little, you're taught follow the prophet. These things are true. Like you can't say what is truth. Like that, the entire premise of the church is truth.
It's so true.
So yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. I told you I'd push your buttons. Sam Jr.
Yeah, mission accomplished. Yeah, so there's tons of ways to tear that argument to pieces, right? Not least of which have been mentioned already. Let's just say, if we're going to define truth for the sake of this argument, that if X and Y are two different claims and they are contradictory, let's say 0 equals 0 and 0 equals 1. Okay, let's just assume that we can know anything, because it'll be a long conversation if we don't start with that assumption. One of these is true and one of these is not true. By definition, they could both be false. One of them can be true and the other can be false. They cannot both be true. So if you're going to tell me that one of these claims, or rather if you're going to say like, what is truth, as if we can't really pin it down, let's just say that if one of these claims is true, then the other one isn't. Right? And let's just establish that claims can be made that are false, right? I can say that 0 equals 1 when it doesn't, right? And obviously, if you want to get like super epistemological, that's a huge philosophical garbage heap, in my opinion. But it's an interesting conversation to have. It doesn't really apply, and I think Olivia illustrated perfectly why it falls apart in a practical sense, like when applied to the church. Here's what I will say about, like, just let people like live. You live your happy, healthy life, and I'll live mine, and I find good stuff in the church. I think it's kind of the Matrix problem, right? Like red pill, blue pill, I think is the combo. It's, okay, do you want to live a lie as a slave, as a serf to totalitarian power, or do you want to face up to reality and fight it like a man or a woman or
an adult?
An adult. Thank you. Like,
or youth.
Like a human being. We'll say like a human being, right?
Yeah.
Like which one is better? Because obviously it's all personal choice, right? I don't want to force anyone to do anything, and I don't think I could in the first place. But like anyone who's going to propose that there isn't a clear set, or there shouldn't be a clear set like value ranking, meaning it's better to face up to reality instead of running away from it, or, you know, plugging your ears and singing to ignore it. First of all, I don't think I can understand that position very well, and I don't sympathize with it very much. Maybe that's a failing on my part. We'll agree to disagree. Finally, I would just say that, yeah, like on the practical level, there's there's a great argument to be had there, right? It's not like clear cut whether or not something's a net benefit or a net detriment. I would say it's a net detriment, the church and what it does in people's lives. But again, I don't even think you have to touch that. I think if you want to address the idea of truth and what it means to face up to reality, it doesn't mean hiding behind faith or hiding behind scripture or anything else and saying, this is my truth, because what is truth, right? It doesn't matter if there are contradictory claims within the church's doctrine itself. It's all up to interpretation, and I get to hide behind my reality. That seems to be what that argument is, and I definitely don't like that.
So I'm going to push back just really quickly, just because this is really important stuff, and this is really relevant. So what we're getting now in Mormonism, whether it's with Spencer Fluman in the Maxwell Institute, Phil Barlow, Terrell and Fiona Givens, Richard Bushman, Adam Miller, Patrick Mason, any of these kind of neo-apologists within Mormonism, what you're getting now from kind of this intellectual privileged elite is they're going around, whether it's in their little books or their little presentations to select groups, or in these little secret firesides that they hold, or in the private one-on-one conversations they have. It's like, yeah, the brethren say the church is true, but they should have never really said that. And when Joseph said translation, what does translation mean? That's really, translation should have been the word that was used. And like, yeah, the church did set you up with this false binary of true and false, but these are just old guys, and they didn't know any better, and they meant it. But we, the neo-apologetic elite Mormon class, progressive liberals, it's not that you were set up. It wasn't about truth. There's truth everywhere. There's beauty everywhere. There's goodness in Mormonism. There's goodness outside of Mormonism. We have things to offer. Other people have things to offer. Book of Mormon doesn't need to be historical. It can just be a book of myth, a book of good principles to help you live your life. And, just between you and me, we can't say this publicly because our salaries or our reputation is based on it. But like when the brethren say it's about truth and the one true church, that's not what it's really about. And we apologize that you were kind of set up with that expectation. Right. But it's just about finding goodness wherever you can find it. And come on, Sam Jr., there's a lot of goodness. There's just a lot of goodness in the church. Yes, it hurts the LGBT people. Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, it hurts women. Yes, it hurts intellectuals. Yes, it hurts people of color. But we're working on that. And you're only going to change it from within. If you leave it, you're not going to have any influence. So if you stay, you get all the benefits. Right. Plus, you get to help make it better because everything's imperfect. And so sorry that you cared so much about truth. Sorry that you believed the word translation when we said translation. Uh-huh. But these were old guys explaining things sincerely without a really mature understanding. And this kind of neo-apologetic, progressive, liberal Mormonism, now coming out of the Maxwell Institute and BYU, Patrick Mason, Spencer Fluman, Thomas McConkie, that's the true, deep, rich Mormonism. Mm-hmm. And just let go of the stupid binary literalistic worldview. There's something deeper and richer here, and you don't have to throw Sam Jr., you don't have to throw the baby out. Sam Sr., Sara, like Olivia, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can have it both. You can be a progressive, liberal, Mormon. You can have all the good of the community, and you can stay in the church and make it better. What's not to like? You get it all.
John, let me talk to you, John. To the first 95% of the argument, go start your own religion.
No.
You don't buy
No, you don't have to.
No,
you don't have
here's
to.
Here's the thing. I'm not the one throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The people who decide what the church doctrine is, they're the ones who are saying, if the bathwater's getting thrown out, the baby's got to go too. Because what if you say, for example, the Book of Mormon is the Word of God, and like if the Book of Mormon is true, then, as I've heard many times the sacrament meaning, then the church is true, and vice versa. So if you disprove the Book of Mormon, it's game over.
But the brethren should have said that. They were wrong when they said that. Right.
So let me ask you this. Why are you part of this religion, John, which you clearly care so much about? Why are you part of the religion if you believe that every single leader?
Because it's a good way to raise my family. It's a community, and there's morality, and it's tradition, and there's spirituality there. There's deep spiritual truth, even if it's not true.
Right. Of course. Yeah, I mean, that fickle thing we call truth, it's really just a joke. I agree. But at the end of the day, like, look, if the Boy Scouts decide, hey, guys, we've adopted a lot of racist, sexist, homophobic ideas, we're also going to meditate for an hour every morning. Does that make that, like, why don't you join that Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, whatever? Along that train of thought, why are you a Mormon instead of a Catholic or a Methodist or a Baptist?
Because it's my tribe. Because it's my people. Like, this is my spiritual language.
Okay, so let me say this as maybe some kind of closure.
He helps.
No, we can keep doing this. This is fun. You can believe whatever you want to believe, but as long as you participate in Mormonism for the reasons that you've listed, I'm going to go to my slightly racist, sexist, homophobic, spiritual Boy Scouts club, and there's not only no difference in validity, but you are operating within a system which, as doctrine to the rest of the world, you might have your little secret club that has its elite knowledge of these things. Have fun with that, right? But at the end of the day, as far as the world and almost all other Mormons are concerned, you believe in things that are not what you're describing, like a specific structure for the afterlife, like the second coming, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah, and I think what these people would say is, we believe in a different Mormonism, and we're okay with that.
Right.
Like that's I'm sad for you that you were given both of you, all of you, that you were given the idea that there's only one way to do a religion. There's only one way to be a Mormon. But you were misled. There are lots of ways to be a Mormon. You can be a literalistic one, a liberal one, a progressive one, a conservative one, a fundamentalist one, and that's the beauty of it. Is that, and I'm obviously, I feel differently about these things, but I'm curious to have this discussion. Like they would just say, you guys were misled. We're sorry, but yes, I have my own version of Mormonism, and everyone, and this is what they'll say. Everyone at the end of the day is a buffet Mormon. Nobody believes everything. Everybody picks and chooses. So yes, everybody is living their own version of Mormonism, and that's the beauty of it, not the bad about it. Let's let Olivia go, and then I'll bring it back to you guys.
Well, the reason it's not beautiful is because, I think there's a good argument to be made that the progress made by the church is the opposite of progress, actually, and is not. Like, it's progress made without the mentality of actually wanting progress. And I think there's an argument to be made that only fuels sort of this underlying resentment. And, like, I don't think that... I think we go backwards as society sometimes. And I think that when we're making progress because it's being forced upon us, or because we have this mentality that is upheld in the church because everyone's buffet Mormon. It's okay. You can leave if you want. But it's still like, I'm not explaining it very well. But the progress that is made in the Mormon church isn't true progress because the people in power in the Mormon church didn't want it in the first place. And that trickles down. And not only does that mean that their progress is lagging, but I think it's almost like a dangerous kind of progress. Like, you could look at it both ways. Like, yeah, it's good that we're progressing, but I think it's just wrong. Like, I think it fuels a sort of blindness where you think that you're living in this progressive thing that is not progressive. And then it creates even more, like, mental health problems for a lot of people. And
it reminds me of Olivia wrote this great article on media. Is that what that's called? Medium. Kind of, was it a letter to church members?
An open letter to the church.
An open letter to church members. And basically saying when there's progress, we give credit to the prophet. And we're grateful for revelation. And she's saying, let's thank the people
the apostates.
Well, let's thank the people who were hurt. Let's thank. I don't want this to sound bad, but thank the gays the
LGBT people who
lost their lives, who took their lives. That's what's making the change. Well, it's not like, I think that's kind of what you're saying, is that it's not the church being progressive, it's the church, their hand being forced, And
But
then
off the suffering of a
Kicking
lot
and
of
by
screaming.
suffering and other people putting pressure on them.
But it's still heralded as progress, which is completely wrong. And it's progress that's not.
It's heralded as revelation.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's it.
Yes.
It's that, like this progress. People within the church thank their church leaders for this, because typically what happens is that the lower rankings in the church start to get uncomfortable, right? And then the higher rankings slowly
Right.
comfort them, and then it's like, oh, thank you. Like, they didn't make that change. This was the activists, the people like giving their lives and their time to actually speak up.
Yep.
Yeah, and so they do the November policy in November 2015. People literally kill themselves. Marriages end, like just all sorts of carnage. It's celebrated as a revelation when it happens. Then when they undo it because of all the marriages and lives that were ruined, it's heralded as a beautiful revelation and as a breakthrough. Yeah. And it's just this massive deception and gaslighting. And I'll just say, I'll answer my arguments to you, which is the Catholic Church just another, great organization? Tell that to all the children that were sexually molested by the priests systematically, and the church covered up and protected the priests at the expense of the victims. Is the Boy Scouts just a benign, healthy organization? Tell it to all the youth that were molested and all the out-of-court settlements where the Boy Scouts paid off families to be quiet so that other future boys could be molested, right? In the church's case, all the LGBT people who have died, all the young women and men who didn't meet their potential because they were believing something was true, because at age 16 you do believe it's true and you do take it seriously. So all the loss of potential, all the women who didn't become what they want to do, all the people of color that questioned their own color of their skin, had all that internalized racism, and all the pain and suffering of that. There's so much pain. Those of you who prop up the church with all its money and all its power to sort of make excuses for it and encourage a middle way, you do that on the backs of and at the expense of LGBT people, people of color, women, intellectuals, dissidents, etc. And you're still ultimately bolstering the church's authority and its claims of being connected with God. And that's where it is always just the most dangerous. Right. Nobody should say they speak for God. Period. It should be against the law of the world to say that you speak for God, because that's too much power. As soon as anyone believes you speak for God, then they've shut off their own internal voice, their own internal morality, and they've just sort of like said, okay, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that's when so much pain and suffering happens. And so, church, if you just want to be this progressive, liberal, open-minded, loving church, you have to stop claiming that you speak to God. You just have to. And you have to figure out a way to stop causing LGBT youth to kill themselves, women to stop living up to their potential, people of color stop telling them that their skin is a result of a curse, and what other groups am I leaving out? Stop harassing truth seekers who just simply talk openly about the church and its teachings, and then you publicly shame and excommunicate them, drive wedges in family between families just because someone speaks out. If you got to drop the claims of talking for God, and you got to stop all the harm you're causing. And then, yes, all you liberal, progressive Mormons can rest easily that you're in a great club, right?
I think the progress that has been made and is being made for the powerful, which is completely not what progress is. Yeah, the focus should be for these minorities, these people who are actually being hurt, not to save the prophet's butt, or the church's $200+ billion in assets, and that's where we are in 2020. Even though maybe they've lost 5% with the stock market, the church is a $200+ billion organization. Within 10 to 20 years, they'll be a $1 trillion organization, and that's really what they're doing when they do make these changes, these press releases. The prophet, when he talks about racism,
when they roll back the LGBT policy, what they're doing is protecting their financial portfolio, their power. They're, like you said, they're not really trying to help anyone. They're not really trying to relieve suffering. They have all these lawyers at Curtin and McConkie that are literally trying to protect their financial assets and protect their power so that they continue to grow their power and influence. Now, I don't think in their minds that's what they're thinking, but that's how the beast operates.
Right.
That's how the beast runs. It runs on money and power. And so the church is not set up to help the poor, the sick, the needy, the afflicted, the disadvantaged, kind of like Christ taught. The church is set up today, the modern Mormon church is set up to protect its financial assets and its absolute power with its membership. And that drives everything. And so authority is the most sacred thing in Mormonism, not Christ. I don't think.
Right. Well, and just quick thought that I just had with what you said about progress and what you added. It's just interesting because when you see progress historically in not exclusively religious settings, like, say, a country moving from authoritarianism, governmentally speaking, to a democracy or representative democracy, right? That is directly antithetical to anything an autocrat would want, right? Like that progress requires an overturning of, the turning over of a new leaf.
Surrendering of power.
Right, a capitulation on the part of the people at the top. And so maybe that's part of the problem within, something like Mormonism is, while progress is still being forced, I don't think what Dad said, if you had Mormonism within a bubble, it wouldn't look the same as it looks today, right? There are societal pressures forcing it to do what it does. But the prophet maintains the whole I speak in the name of God mentality, and that doesn't affect their standing among their members, which is dangerous.
If I'm a cafeteria Mormon, if that's the model, I'm a Mormon that's carrying my tray through, and I don't want what you're serving. If that's the model we're going with. If it's not true, no, thank you.
But it's a
I'll
nice
pass.
community. You got all these friends.
Great.
Yeah,
It's a great way to raise your kids. Youth programs.
That's what I was
The Mormon
just gonna
Tabernacle
say.
Choir.
I think I would take my tray along and go to a different cafeteria. Like, I'm sure this has been said
exactly.
before. What's unique in Mormonism isn't good, and what's good in Mormonism isn't unique. I can go
Exactly,
get it
yeah.
somewhere else.
Right. Well,
If that's-
I think what I was trying to get at before, to some extent, with my previous answer was Mormonism just becomes meaningless. Like you're saying,
Right.
there's no reason to go with Mormonism other than, well, it's what I was indoctrinated with
born
Mormonism
into.
when I was born. So
Yeah, that's my
all
tribe.
right, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for everyone's patience while we kind of had that deep philosophical debate. No offense to all the neo-apologists out there. I know you're sincere and you think you're doing good, and you probably are. Who knows? But this is just how we feel.